Jinghan Zeng, welcome to BRI Dialogues. It's 10th of October, 2022, and a beautiful sunny day. And I wanted to start with a question that you can shed some light as well on. The fifth yearly party conference is about to come. We're just almost there. There's a lot of anticipation, prediction. Do you think as a result of this, particular anticipated conference, BRI will be boosted, reinforced, or it's just business as usual? How do you see this latest party conference affecting BRI?
Right, I think we should say about the BRI from a more wider perspective, from a project per se. Belt and Road Initiative clearly is considered Xi Jinping's signature project. It will be his political legacy. That's why it has been incorporated into the constitution. So we anticipate that the party congress will definitely continue to talk about Belt and Road Initiative. But however, its future forms might slightly be changed because of the different political landscapes. I think we all know that the Chinese economy is not as strong as before. So how much China can continue to invest overseas, that is a question. And also the political environment is fundamentally different now. The way that Chinese investment has been welcomed in the past few years and in the current context is also very different. So, and also a lot more focus on environmental sustainability. And we have seen that a lot of BRI projects are not really financially sustainable. So all those questions, I think, needs to be answered and need to be readjusted. But I wouldn't say that will lead to a rhetorical change in the China side. This will continue to be held as an important project, as a slogan. I always consider Belt and Road Initiative to be the slogan that has been shouted out very clearly, representing Xi Jinping's political agenda and legacy. So that approach will continue to be followed, follow Xi Jinping's third term during the party congress. However, what Belt and Road Initiative actually means, or its future direction and its actual content, then that is subject to the changes and also subject to the discussion within the party and within the country to see how things might evolve. We have heard about new concepts such as global security initiative, global development initiative, how those might be shaping BRI, what are their relation with Belt and Road Initiative, and does this represents a kind of new thinking on those things? I think all those discussions are now taking place, and it's something being debated within China and within the Chinese Communist Party. But that does not mean that the CCP will suddenly say we drop Belt and Road. No, they will continue to hear that out, and there might be some, but it's again their definition and understanding of the concept per se might be different, and that's something might need to change.
Jinghan, that is really interesting. Ali started with the 20th Party Congress, which obviously is the biggest game in town. We are speaking to you just about a week before it, and we'll broadcast just about a week after it. So it'd be really interesting to have your take on what to expect on two grounds. One is some of the policy contours that might be taking shape. But the other is, as you know, and you've written on this yourself extensively, is the character of the party leadership. That somehow President Xi Jinping is a different kind of leader and so on. Given that the world expects the party to re-emphasize his leadership, if for want of a better term, what should we expect of the party congress, and what role would the president be playing and be emerging out of the Congress, do you think?
Right. Well, I think definitely what we're going to see is will be a continued third term for the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and that is for sure. But there might be some changes regarding what does that mean as for Xi Jinping and his personal standing in the party and in the country. At the same time, what will be interesting to observe will be who will be appointed as other members in the Politburo Standing Committee. And that will send very important political signals. And a crucial things, I think it's probably more mathematical than technical, is the age, is who might be the youngest Politburo Standing Committee member, and how young that they might be, because that will send a signal of who might be the successor of Xi Jinping, or will there be no successor at all. And if you go back to the 17th Party Congress, clearly Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, their age are just being said there, that we can tell very clearly they are going to become the future leader of China back in 17th Party Congress. So I think for this one specifically, we need to pay attention to that. And I think even until now, we don't know whether there will be a successor or not. So I think there will be quite a lot of questions on that. Regarding the policy front, I do see what is important now is a big debate within the party and within China. To what extent we should be balancing the two goals. One goal is to minimizing the impact of COVID on the health of the society. On the other hand, is the continued growth of Chinese economy. You do see that these two are contradictory kind of goals in a way. And especially when it comes to the local government side, they find they are difficult to handle, and they don't know which one might be a priority, because the slogan from the top is we should have zero COVID. At the same time, we should have very good economic performance. So it's up to individual leaders and up to regional leaders to interpret what this means and how they can basically maneuver during this period to achieve both, if possible at all. So in the 20th Party Congress, I think there will be probably a little bit more clarity on that. And we might see some shift in the emphasis on different kind of things. I think there was a lot of expectation previously saying that China will be dropping zero COVID policy after 20th Party Congress. I don't think things will come that dramatically, because for China to have a U-turn on that, you need a lot of time to build up the propaganda, build up persuasion and narrative, and that all takes time. So, but I think the 20th Party Congress can send a signal that now it might be a time for us to reflect a bit, probably put a little bit more focus on economic growth. You can see that kind of trajectory, a little bit more on economic growth, and less probably sensitive about stability, because what has been happening now, a few months until the 20th Party Congress, social stability has been a priority of a priority that had trumped everything. Every time before a major leadership succession in the Chinese Communist Party, social stability is always a key, because they know that is a moment things can go wrong. So everything has to serve the goal of a stable social order. But then now with the Party Congress finished and the leadership succession finished, although we wouldn't be say a U-turn, we can see that they might gradually loosen the kind of emphasis on social stability, maybe allow a bit of other things that wouldn't be happening before the Party Congress.
So if we take this then towards China's international relations, do you think the West should welcome President Xi Jinping being reestablished in his post, or should the West fear his reestablishment in the post? Is continuity better than change, do you think, at this point, or vice versa?
Well, I think that's a very normative question, actually. It depends on what kind of values you want to follow, right? But let's say if we put the normative side, right, on the value side away, probably we can get different kind of interpretation from it. For financial investors, it might not necessarily be a bad thing to have a leader who continue their terms, right? In the UK, we all know that a new prime minister come very quickly in a few days and fundamentally change the financial market and the expectation about the British economy. And the same that in the US, the presidential election can be a big changes to the financial prediction. And so for a lot of investors, sometimes continuity, stability, predictability can be actually a very good thing rather than bad thing. It's just you have to factor in on pricing those things. But regarding to welcome or fair, I think it depends on the normative values. Clearly, we see, I think there was a lot, to understand the situation now, we have to go back to the 18th Party Congress back in 2012. And before then, there was high expectation on the Chinese President Xi Jinping as the new leader who comes in. And there's a lot of discussion saying that he might be the pro-liberal reform kind of leader, because he has so many experience being a governor in Fujian province, which is a market economy coast area. and how he might want probably just focus a lot more on liberal building of liberal democracy and subscribe to those kind of ideas. But all turns out those were not true. So I think we should be very careful in what we are, saying things we want to say. I think that's especially from a Western angle, because I can see a lot of Western analysts or medias trying to say Chinese politics the way they prefer to say or they want to say, not actually what things really it is. So that always lead to the expectation gap, that lead to the disappointment, and then a kind of big problems. So that's something we should be very careful. And regarding to whether we should be welcoming or fair, depends on, again, your normative values. Clearly, I think that normative value decides about how things might be going on in the situation. I think within the Chinese Communist Party, it has been justified that because the party has been so facing so many problems, so many challenges, it requires a strong leader, requires someone who have experience to stay on to do the job. So that is a justification for this certain.
Jinghan, that is very, very insightful. Nobody expects a scholar, an expert on matters like you to be able to psychoanalyze President Xi. But this whole lockdown, which has been really prolonged, could it be a byproduct that he grew up at the time of the Great Leap Forward and the famine and that experience of losing a lot of people, and he really wanted to avoid that? Because there's a lot of correlation between him and Mao Zedong in terms of the approach. But he wanted to make sure that if there is a pandemic, I'm not going to let it happen to take away a big population of mine in rural areas or in the urban centers. And in that context, back to your point, consistency in a population of 1.4 billion people is imperative regionally, globally, and I would say domestically. How do you correlate his way of governance and approach to COVID from the angle that I brought up, and how hard-headed he may be in the way of pushing forward with his global agenda, if we are to learn anything from the lockdowns?
Right. I think those are very good questions. Actually, there is a lot of discussion probably on what Xi Jinping actually learned from the Chinese history, from the lesson of actually his father, if you say Xi Zhongxun, and he actually was a victim of the Cultural Revolution during Mao Zedong's time, and how Xi Jinping grew up in that kind of Red China, how that has been affecting his current approach currently. And clearly, I don't think that's something new, because if you see back in 2012, when he started to become the Chinese president, and also the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, by then I think he very much liked the kind of mass campaign style of kind of things that has been reflected in many areas. And it was very clear he believed a people's approach, believe in mass campaign, mass mobilization, and those kind of approach has not been used or used so frequently or favored by his predecessor like Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin. So that is clear that we can see that. And this can be relevant to the current kind of COVID situation in a way that relies on those things. But we have also to bear in mind that I think the current situation is not very desirable in many ways, and is not, we should avoid the kind of suggesting that it has been deliberately designed in this way of COVID. I think that's something we should be avoiding. And regarding your question about how Xi Jinping had balanced the governance of COVID and pushing global agenda, well, I think that's very challenging, because now I think there is, like I mentioned at the beginning, there was a fundamental concern in China. They take a COVID a lot more serious than that in the UK, for example. In the UK, people do not really been caring it, and you can say people haven't been wearing masks from the very beginning. But in China, they take it very seriously, and there are lots of reasons for them to do that. And I think it's also the intensity of the population, and also old people, traditional family values, and the government feels that they are also concerned that there will be bigger disruption to social stability by giving up zero COVID policy. If the current zero COVID policy is disrupting the Chinese economy, they are fearing that alternative might fundamentally bring a kind of social chaos or social disorder China cannot handle. And I think there are a lot of reasons behind that, about how effective is the Chinese vaccine, China's healthcare system, and all sorts of that, I think, has led to fear of this opening up, of this adopting the same kind of thing. And also there are concern about the deaths of the people and how that number. I think all sorts of that. I think they need to think it very carefully, and no one can really make the shot to say, let's do that. And who is going to be blamed? Who is going to take a responsibility? I think those are big questions. But at the same time, I think to answer your question, I believe this has been seriously restricted about China's global agenda. Because back then, if you say 2012, the first thing Xi Jinping talked about is Belt and Road Initiative in the end of 2013, new type of great power relation with the United States back in 2012. That idea was that China should be viewed as equal great power as the United States. And the kind of great rejuvenation of China, great revival of China has always been there as a slogan shouting out that is considered as a mission to deliver. And that is something the Communist Party is there for, is to deliver great prosperity for the society and great rejuvenation of Chinese people. And that would require China to do a lot of things. And you see that Xi Jinping has been a lot more willing to getting away from the previous keeping a low profile style, want to become a global leader. In many ways, we have seen that in creation of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and in a lot of areas, China contribute a lot more. UN peacekeeping, climate change, China is a lot more willing to demonstrate its leadership credential and want to show its leadership in global governance, and very much wants to become a global leader. In a more recent study, I look into the AI side. China clearly wants to be viewed as a global AI leader, write the rules, shape the rules in the Chinese interest, in the Chinese terms. And this is not something we have really been seeing back in early 20s, 2000s or 1990s. So there was a clear kind of leadership bench there, but the COVID has been seriously, and the way China's the zero COVID policy has been seriously undermining this foreign policy goal. Because what I've seen now is China has been largely isolated from the outside world. The exchange, business exchange, political exchange, cultural exchange has been reduced to a minimum stage. And you see in Europe, in the North America, things has become quite normal. So it has been something very undesirable for China. But again, let's go back to the domestic priority, is how you can really make the balance of the domestic goals, which is maintain stability and to ensure that China is able, and access the political risk, and also the deaths, access the potential death rates of the COVID to balance its foreign policy goals. I don't think it's very easy call in this situation.
Jinghan, that is absolutely wonderful analysis that you're providing us with. We're going to be talking about technology and AI in any case, so I'm glad you raised those issues. But given the COVID balance that you've so rightly focused on in your recent responses to us, individuals are having to pay a heavy price, a financial price, for China's COVID strategy. You know, it can run into about $10,000, for example, for an individual to go and visit family back home, or for anybody else, for that matter, try and do business, forget tourism into China for the moment. And you've rightly also focused on the communal social dimensions of China's strategy. But in your view, is this really sustainable? The price that the Chinese government strategy is extracting from individuals on the one hand and from the national economy on the other, that can this continue like this? Because as you know, we are already talking about possible new waves of COVID and flu coming along. Isolation for a country like China? Is that really feasible going forward?
Well, I think that's a very good question. That's why in China there is some fierce debate on those matters. But I think I would like to clarify a few things. First of all, as an individual, the current individual which has been affected most financially speaking, as you mentioned, will be people like me who are Chinese but overseas, and you are not able to return to China. Although things are a lot more better now, but if you still in the summertime, I think for a lot of students in my university and also in the UK, I think the one single return ticket will be £9,000, and you have to go back to China, spend another £1,000 also to do the quarantine for 7 days, and then a lot of things. And even by that price, you cannot even easily secure a flight ticket. It's not like you spend £9,000 and get a ticket. It's not. You have to be very lucky to do that. So the financial cost of that is very clear. That's why you have a lot of overseas Chinese has not been returned to China for 3 or 5 years, 3 years or 4 years. That's kind of story very common. And this has led to dissatisfaction of the overseas Chinese community. All of that is very clear. But within China, I wouldn't say they are facing the same thing. I mean, even if you are being quarantined, most likely scenario will be government will pay for that, will pay for the food, and will pay for the accommodation, although probably it's not very desirable. I have heard a lot of complaint about the food is not very good, the bed is not very comfortable, sort of that. But the financial cost of that is different. So and also 95% of the people belongs to that category. But having said that, I think you are right. A lot of industry in China has been seriously affected. Tourism, hotel, restaurant. I mean, you cannot plan things ahead. Imagining you are planning a restaurant, have a grand opening, and then 2 days later, government coming, so you have to stop for 14 days, and then open for 3 days, and then you don't know when my things come. So you cannot plan things ahead, and a lot of industry has been affected by that. And to me, I think the wider problem is beyond that a specific industry has been affected by COVID, but the confidence, the general confidence of Chinese people and also international society on the health of Chinese economy. To me, that is the biggest worry, because currently in the stock market and also in day-to-day discussion, in the way people has been doing savings and spending, you can see clearly people are losing confidence. And back in then, before the COVID, I think there was a clear kind of highly confident in China, in which young people, you probably say survey show that most youth in China believe that China is going to become better and better. But now, if you see the past few years, the employment rate for young people, a lot of students are struggling to find a job for obvious reasons. So also of that, I think the biggest worry is really confidence about Chinese economy and the confidence about China's future in general, within China and without China. Clearly, you can see a lot of business in Europe, in UK, has been talking about diversification, although it's not a new concept, but clearly, with being able to go to China for 3 years, people already kind of getting used to that. That's the biggest danger for China, that people get used to live without China, without doing business with China. Or when you think about the next new big investment, it would be China. You will be diversifying away from China. I think that is very, very worrying for the Chinese government and for China in general. And to answer your question, is that sustainable? I don't think so. So this is why I think the Chinese government is facing more and more pressure, right? But if you see from their logic, I think they have domestic kind of priorities. One priority is you need to have stability before 20th Party Congress, because that's where things can go wrong. You need that. And also you want to probably get a little bit more time to see how COVID has been evolving in other countries, so that you can have a little bit more confidence to say it's already okay. Because in the past 3 years, we have seen that 1 year we think this will be the last winter, and then suddenly COVID come back, and we say this will be last winter, and then COVID come back. So you got like so many uncertainties. But once you open up, you will no longer ever have control. So this is why they were. I think part of the thinking is to let's wait a bit. I know it's difficult to tolerate that, but let's wait a little bit longer to see how things evolve in UK, in North America, in other places who just open up. And then the longer time we do, the more we saw and the more confidence it probably will have to make that tough call. So I think yes, but again, we talk about long term, it's not sustainable. But in the short term, I think financially it's very costful. Imagining the amount of money they spend in COVID test, right? Like I'm from Chongqing, they have like 30 million people, and everybody have to test once a week. How much money that is going to cost? And also all the kind of facility you build there for quarantine, and the people you hire to do that job, and all the kind of facility accessories. That's a huge amount of money. And we have already heard that different Chinese province has been shouting out they don't have money to do that. And there was some kind of internal argument over who should be paying it. Should we be looking into the port of here and there? And those will come out, no, don't look at our pockets. We don't have money. And we have already seen that in some more less developed area, less developed province, which do not have a lot of financial surplus. They are struggling a lot in continuing this approach. So I think, yes, in the long run, financially, it's definitely not sustainable. And this is why I think things might be different after the 20th Party Congress, but still, it will require some time to give confidence to the policymaker in China to say, everything looks all right in Europe, everything looks all right in North America. If we do the right things, we should be okay. And also, I think very crucially for them is they need to make advantage of this gap to ensure there is high level of vaccine population in China. But currently, you do see that the percentage of people getting COVID, getting a vaccine rates, is that satisfactory or not? Is the vaccine really meets the standard we expect? I think all those kind of medical questions being there as well. So there is a lot of consideration in those regard.
This is fascinating listening to you, Jinghan. I'm not saying this just to cheer you up as one of our bright guests. It's illuminating, but I want to be a bit of a devil's advocate here to both myself, you, and Anush and our listeners. China has lifted 400 million people out of poverty, which is a stellar record by any stretch of imagination. It has as well, through BRI, has gone out with some early sour scorecards, Sri Lanka, other places, but as well, some really positive projects around the world. So in my head, for many, Belt Road Initiative was a Belt Road inspiration in Global South. Can this COVID pause be as well a stress test more at the macro level for Chinese society in a decoupling nature from the world of how they can continue, maintain, coexist? And we will come to the very dialogue about AI and digital Silk Road. But do you anticipate part of this as well is to test and see what is the threshold and the capacity and resilience of the country? Because this chip and microchip and semiconductor test as well may cause another technological quarantine for China. So do you see at a macro level a correlation between the stress test and that element of inspiration in Global South from what China has done or continues to do so?
Right. Well, I think that's something we have probably to linked with where is the future progress of Chinese science come from, right? There was a bigger debate, I think, within China, right? How China can continue to achieve its technological breakthrough. And obviously, nowadays, there's a lot more emphasis on self-sufficiency. We should be focusing on by ourselves and make sure that the key technology are firmly in our hands. But on the other side, you also got a lot of Chinese scientists that tell you that how this is not difficult, how much money we have been wasted in doing those kind of things, and we haven't been going anywhere. And it's a global community. We have to work with others to achieve things we want to achieve. And they are arguing that the kind of view that make China less dependent on others, but make others depend on China is a wishful thinking, cannot be achieved at all. So you do see that kind of debate within China over that. This is relevant to this kind of decoupling kind of argument. But clearly, I think with the worsening US-China relations, we will see that it has been giving more weight to those who support kind of made in China argument, saying, you know, we have no other choice. We have to do things in made in China. Otherwise, we are not going anywhere. So you can do see that. And this has been creating fundamental problems for China's tech giants. Because a lot of them actually in China, they have even being invested by foreign capitals. And now with the government come to saying, you know what, we are going to prioritize in hardcore technology. So what is hardcore technology? Is Alibaba hard technology by doing things like Amazon? Or WeChat, a social media group, is that hardcore technology? Or is that Meituan sending deliveries hardcore tech? That's not. None of that is. What hardcore technology will be sending a rocket to the moon, right? To Mars. So those kind of rocket science, material, those kind of things. So that requires a fundamentally reflection of the China's tech giants over how do they position themselves, right? How can they meet this government agenda in order to continue to operate in China's political environment? And also, it will create other problems for them. Imagining now with the worsening US-China relations, there are a lot more scrutiny on TikTok, a lot more scrutiny on WeChat, a lot more scrutiny on Alibaba, delisting them in New York stock market, and accusing them of a threat of national security, accusing them of sending those young people's data as if it matters back to China, and they're doing some whatever analysis they do to control the population, all kind of things. So is that a new thing? That's not a new thing, but why it's become so important now? It's because of the relation between China and the West is become worse and worse. So this has been all affecting the way they operate internationally and domestically. So now, despite a lot of discussion on digital Silk Road, of having this Chinese engagement in global South, I think it's making them more and more difficult for Chinese tech giants and technology to work with the West in general, because of technological concern, because there is suspicion on anything Chinese, right? If you have a Chinese camera, anything can be suspicious. So making those tech giants more and more difficult to operate their transnational business in the West. But I would argue this will not be affecting or not being significantly affecting their operation in places like Africa, like Middle East. Currently, you can see that a lot of Western lobbying say, you know, you shouldn't be taking that Chinese technology. They are bad for you. They are not good for national security. But again, to me, that's very much a Western thinking, right? But to a lot of developing countries, and also part to China, what is more important, right? You can see the privacy issue, all those things are important. But what is more important is economic growth, is the convenience, is the things without this technology, I cannot even secure a good living standards. That is more important to them. And this is not something that I don't think a lot of Western liberal democracy gates, because they have passed that stage. They cannot feel the pain. They cannot feel the same feeling that developing countries are feeling. So to them, I do think there is a considerable kind of rooms for China to engage with the global South, of benefit them by working with them, of providing Chinese technology, to provide them cheaper, more accessible kind of options to make it otherwise unavailable. And now the current pressure to me is not a stress test or resilience of their presence in Africa or in the Middle East. I think it's more of resilience test of their operation in Western liberal democracies. Right. It's about, you can see that some of them currently are doing okay, like TikTok, but you are going to see more and more resilience tests, more and more, stress tests on how far they can go and how they're going to respond. But we see that Huawei, for example, is a very clearly example which was doing very well in the UK side previously, and now has become suddenly a big collapse of its market. So is that a technological problem? I don't think so. It's a political problem. And it's a political problem probably based without any technological evidence of making it happen. And so this is what has been happening. and what might be happening in the future, I do think if we go back to the Silk Road, digital Silk Road debate, then I would say that China's digital Silk Road will still have will still be very popular in developing countries like Africa, like Middle East, but probably, I mean, obviously not countries they have direct geopolitical conflict like India, for example. That's a different story. But when it comes to their engagement or cooperation in the US, Europe, in UK, I do see that there will be more and more stress, more and more criticism, more and more probably forces to push them out. So how are they going to survive? We don't know. This is why we see in China, there is a lot of expectation on TikTok to say, no Chinese company ever before has worked out a way to become a global giant, dominating Western market and survive well. If you are successful, you will be the one. That's a lot of expectation on TikTok right now.
I could listen to you all day, Jinghan. That is really, really interesting analysis you're providing. Let me pose two kind of maybe contradictory questions. One is, do you see now, as a consequence of this rupture between the West and China on the tech front, a rupture around the world as well, that, you know, there was an assumption that convergence of technology, in other words, the West transferring technology to China, China making it cheaper and then distributing globally. The breakdown in that chain will mean disruptions in the flow of technologies as well. That's one. The other side of it, of course, is for all the tensions between the West and China, we see many Western companies, Tesla being one of them, for example, remain wholly committed to working with China and so on. For all of India's desperate drive to try and substitute China, it's clear from the perspective of Western technological giants that there is no substitute, right? So we've got that on the one hand, that Western high-tech companies know that they need to work with China. China knows that it needs them in order to develop, on the one hand. But on the other hand, we've got in the global south this battle being played out between the Western governments and the Chinese tech giants. How do you see these tectonic forces playing out as we go forward in the next few years?
Right, I think that's a very important question, actually. And I probably would like to address the second one first. It's very clear. I think it's not only in tech side, it's a lot of business side, even in higher educational sector. We all know there's no next China to be replaced, given the size and given its importance. A lot of thinking are looking at new market like India, things like that. But again, India is not there, at least in 5-10 years time. So what are you going to do? And currently, there is a lot of slogan shouting out of diversification, right? We all need to diversify. But again, this is not solving the problem. This is slightly reduce your exposure to China, but no really big kind of transnational education, transnational business would want to say, okay, that's it, let's leave the Chinese market. Because in the past few decades, we all have benefited so much from China, that's clear. So, and also for Tesla, again, that's one clear example. Without Shanghai, without China market or the factory in China, it will not be able to deliver the number of cars that you will need, and wouldn't be able to sustain its stock market price. So that would lead to a situation that everybody will lose. So it's very clear. I think it's not controversial to say that we all want to have a very successful economic relation with China. Now, the only issue is political relation with China. And that political relation with China, I do say, can be very challenging because the Chinese perspective and the Western perspective are very different, right? And now if you look at issues one by one over the issue of Taiwan, I do say that we have exaggerated a lot about the risk or the likelihood of China will be doing anything with Taiwan in the short term. It's simply not happening. And on the issue of Russia, there is a lot of discussion on how we should be punishing China, avoiding China become the next Russia, things like that. But from a Chinese perspective, this is totally irrelevant. Why I should be punished by something Russia is doing, and also to me, as international relations scholar, I think we do feel that the way you treat other people, right? If you treat them as a friend, the more likely they will be your friend. So the more you treat them as an enemy, the more likely you will make them an enemy. And the more we push in China towards Russia, the more we treating China as an enemy, then the more likely it's going to be one. And also back to that point, I do see China from a different perspective. I know externally we see China as one single coherent entity, right? And then a lot of discussion on national security problems and China's threat, this and that. But what I have seen China is from internal perspective. I do see that within China, there are multiple groups has been debating where is the future of China. And a big group are saying that China needs to work and engage with the rest of the world, especially United States and UK and Europe in general. They are the one pro-engagement. They are the one believe that China needs to rely on them to keep our sustainable economic growth, to modernize, right? A lot of learning from the West. And you got other groups saying that, which is very nationalistic, which is very dismissive of the West or anti-West in general. And you see that debates, right? Some of them saying, how can we rely on Russia, right? Russia economy is so small. What you are going to get out of it? If you cut all your ties with Europe, with United States, what's the future of China's economic growth? So you do see that debates. And my point here is the West has been really more and more treating China as an enemy and giving China geopolitical pressure, has been making those pro-engagement, pro-liberal forces make their arguments less and less convincing, and making those voices about nationalism, about nationalistic or harsh line, hawkish kind of view in China, we are giving them and helping them to win the arguments. And that is not very good for the benefit of China and for the benefit of the rest of the world. So I think we should really be thinking carefully of what we were doing now and its potential consequences. I think all has been happening now is we haven't really been seeing that the potential consequence of that. So this is, to me, I think China needs to engage with the Western world. The world also needs to engage with China to ensure that it's for its own benefit. And so we turn back to your question about that thing. I do say, yes, we have different values, different ideology, but does that mean that we have to be enemies? I don't think in that way. I think we are losing the kind of being pragmatic approach as we did in the past. And I think if we want to do anything better good, is we should continue to that. You need to work with those who you disagree and need to work with and treat China as China is an important member of international community. Like it or not, it will be there. You need to find a way to work with them. But a lot of politicians I see in the West has been advocating approach. They don't want to shout out. What they really want is undiplomatic relation with China, but they are afraid to say so.
Very interesting. And I want to just add to what you just said and ask you a question about the AI and the future of AI, because you have touched on it, that you said in US it's market driven, in EU it's consumer ethics, GDPR driven, but AI from China is state driven. And I'll come to that. But an observation I had, and Anush, you may find this interesting as well, is that there are 399 CCTVs per square kilometer in London, 278 per square kilometer in Beijing. The population of Beijing is 21.3 million. And then yet at the same time, technology doesn't necessarily bring safety, as we've seen sadly so in society with the latest knife crime in London. So I think there is a lot to be learned from one another. But where do you see the governance of AI approach going? One of the key questions I have, Jinghan, is that financial markets are dollar-driven. Until renminbi comes to a point that it can flex its muscles, it's going to take a long time. That is the reality. But then this decoupling, how much of that is real? Even, okay, if tomorrow morning United States cuts China and, TSMC sets up a plant in Arizona, I don't know, the others in Wisconsin, but the grid remains an American Western-driven grid, you know? So all of the, I would say, oracles of the world and technology infrastructure for connecting the world, is that there a threat as well inherent? That tomorrow morning, even if you have your own payment solutions, gateway solutions, US would say, you're not allowed to use my digital grid globally. And if that happens, how quickly can China co-create or create for Global South and itself a grid independent, not as a splinter net, but as an infrastructure? Because these are key questions. And I doubt that level of pragmatism, sadly, that you're talking about is at the moment brewing or even blinking.
Yeah, well, I agree. That is that is not really there. Okay, so if we look into what has been happening in China regarding this AI and the big kind of development of AI and its implication for public safety. One thing I think we want to make sure is it's very interesting that if you see that kind of the way cameras being implemented in China and or the surveillance, the state surveillance being there, you don't really have been receiving considerable social resistance to that in China. But in the UK, in the United States, there was a heavy debate and lots of regulation trying to tie the government hand on that. I think that there are lots of reasons for that. I think one of the key reasons is in China, you can generally say that many do believe that that technology will bring safety. And they think that that will be very helpful to bring to enhance the public safety in China in general. And also, but this has led to a lot of prediction in the West about, for example, the rise of digital surveillance states, China's social credit system, how this might become Big Brother 2.0, this and that. But currently, what I have seen here is a lot of bureaucratic and technological problems. If you really go into do research on social credit system, you'll find it's very fragmented and different provinces have their own system. It's not really as powerful as many we expect, but that's a fundamentally different topic. And then you ask me about how this global governance AI approach is going. I do think there are multiple ways. Sorry. Indeed, a more recent paper I wrote with Chen Jing in Xili University specifically talk about this global governance AI approach. We do see that it's imperative for us to have a globally coherent collective response to the AI problems. You see that AI has been creating all sorts of and contributing to the social inequality within the society. Those with the skill and without skill is going to become, the gap is going to be wider and wider. And also countries with advanced AI technology and without AI advanced technology, their gap will become wider and wider. That's for sure. And we can see that there is now a lot of discussion on weaponization of AI, and that seems to me quite dangerous. Then lead to a question of to what extent a warbird can be authorized to kill a human being, right? And if you kill the civilians, who should be responsible for that, right? In what circumstances a warbird can be authorized to kill a human being, in what sense, in what form, and who should be responsible? I think we haven't really have a clear understanding of that. This is why here we need a global governance of AI, in which you should have something like uncontrolled kind of mechanism with multilateral platform. People all come together, talk about the implication of AI for governance, social economic inequality, weaponization, and all those kind of topics and kind of issue created by AI, how we can address that collectively. That's how things should be. But what is happening now is not. Is we are all being blind by geopolitics. This is Chinese AI, that is American AI, and this Chinese AI believe in Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics, do not believe in American values. So that is very problematic to me. So we have seen here so far, lots of global AI initiative has been created for the purpose of countering Chinese or Russia influence, right? They were designed there not to include China as an important player of AI, but designed there to counter Chinese influence, trying to kick China out of those multilateralism. And I do think that's very dangerous, because to me, the real issue lies in the AI. It's AI relation with a human being. Is how we can work with AI to ensure it deliver in a sustainable and equal and also positive way for human society. So what is important is the human's relation with this machine, not the problems within the human being itself. And I think currently we have been distracted by our own problems, our own politics, that we're fighting each other, and we forgot that there is a wider problem. And this is relevant to some other issue like technological standard of AI. Now, what decides technological standard of AI is no longer technological, it's political. It's about national, it's about this is invented by China, this is invented by the United States. That's problematic. Sorry.
I said very interesting. And we normally bring our questions and sessions to an end. And this really nicely weaves into it. We could go on and on and on, and we definitely would love to have you back. But Jinghan, if you were to leave the cinephobes with one piece of advice and cinephiles with one piece of advice, what would be your key message to them on this sunny day and this October day of 2022? What would be your words of wisdom to the cinephobes and cinephiles?
Well, okay, that's a that's a very challenging task. I think then I would say that we should keep faith in China, and I do see that there is another decades. There's a lot of discussion nowadays how the best time for China or the best time to work with China has now made an end, and China is going to become something we more and more dislike. And the talk about China era is gone, long gone. But I personally think that we should continue to keep facing China. And I believe that there will be a brighter future for China. And only by engaging with China, no less, we will be able to secure really a prosperity future for all the societies. So I still view that the wider issue is how we can continue to engage with China, to bring China as a part of the international community, to make friends with China. And I think without solving that properly, it's going to create lots of issues, lots of problems. So if that's a takeaway message, then let's keep faith.
Yeah, that is absolutely. We love ending on a positive note, Jinghan, and you have given us that. But the undercurrent in your analysis has been not to lose sight of pragmatism in Chinese decision making. That actually China is a complex state. It's a large society in which values really matter, and that pay attention to the way in which decisions percolate to the top, because the roots are not necessarily authoritarian or indeed monolithic, that China is a multitude of states. You've written already that actually, if you look at China, it's a process of fragmentation, decentralization, and internationalization that explains modern China. And in your analysis today with us, you have more than ably explained and demonstrated that. So you represent a very wise head on young shoulders, and that is exactly what the future needs. Not only to be able to speak on multiple platforms on behalf of different communities that make up our world, but also, as you've done for us today, to shine the light on positive pathways that can help us look forward with positive ideals and outlooks rather than negative ones. As we worry about climate change, as we worry about the war in Ukraine, as we worry about the Middle East, as we worry about so many things, about hunger and so on, to be able to end on a positive note from you is just a breath of fresh air. So we really thank you, not just for the analysis, but also for the way in which you've brought our discussion to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jinghan. Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you both.